Start out today by just talking a little bit about how we do recycle paper. There are all different ways that paper can be made. You may purchase supplies, most of these from the internet. Arnold Brumer is the person that is probably the most highly regarded paper maker, and he is the one you will find the most supplies with his name on those. I buy Arnold Brumer things all the time, and they're really high quality, and they will last a long, long time. If they have made it through all the middle schoolers that have made paper with me, then you know that they're really built to last, so they're very, very good. This is cotton linter. You may make paper from cotton that has been recycled. You may use linen. It has to be a natural material. So you really want to make sure that when you make paper that you are using all natural materials. You don't want polyester or nylon. Anything that is made in a chemical way is not a good idea to use in your paper. So this is cotton linen. This is pure 100% cotton that can be used in making your paper. You may also tear up old napkins, shirts, tablecloths, things that may have holes in them that you are just going to throw out. If they are 100% cotton or 100% linen, then you can actually tear those up and use those to make your paper. So it is a great way to use some of those things that would just find their way to the trash heap, but you can make some beautiful paper with it. This is cotton linter. Now I have on the table today a large variety of other add-ins that you can add into your paper. There are so many that you can use. The supply is really limitless. It's as far as your imagination can take you. Now today I'm actually going to be using, some of you help me eat the kisses, we're going to be using some foil to add into our paper from some strawberry kisses that I purchased recently. So we're going to add those into our paper. I also am going to use a piece of, this is like a parchment paper that one of my students started using and then didn't like it and wanted to start over, and so I'm going to use this parchment paper as well in making the paper. Then I'm going to use a piece of paper that it's very, very old, but it's still perfectly fine for making paper, and this is just a runoff paper. This is an extra long piece of just the regular runoff paper. It's not very thick, and I use this for the base of a lot of my papers. It's always great to help all of your fibers bind if you have some regular paper that you can add into your paper when you're making it. Now we're going to be reconstituting all of this with water, and then we're going to be blending it in the blender, which will break down the fibers to the original pulp. So what we're going to wind up with is something that looks like very kind of runny oatmeal. If you know what runny oatmeal looks like, that's the kind of consistency that we want when we make our paper. So I'm going to use for my paper today only about a half a sheet of this, a little bit less than half. I'm going to tear this up, and when I tear it up, I'm just going to tear it in small pieces. It doesn't have to be any particular size. That cotton linter, what I showed you earlier, this cotton linter. Some people actually have torn up blue jeans and put those, if they're 100% cotton, you have to cut those first. It's really thick fiber, but if you tear those up in small pieces and put them in here, you will actually get some paper that's made with blue jeans. So you can do that with blue jeans. As I said, any natural material, and that's what makes it fun. So every piece of paper is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to add just a very small amount of this cotton linter to it. Again, this gives it strength. So this will give it some strength. Don't put very much. All of this kind of grows once you put the water in there, so you don't want to put too much. You can always add more to it. Then I'm going to take some of this, which is pink, this parchment paper. I'm going to tear it up. It's got some pencil writing on it, so we'll see in the end if any of that shows up. Some of this foil. Now foil obviously is not, it is a natural aluminum, but this is not going to break down like our natural materials will. So one of the things I want to make sure when I put that in there is to break it up. kind of small. Some of these little pieces will break up further, but some will stay kind of intact. So that was about half full of water. And I think one of the fun things is watching it blend. That's a little bit over half, and that's fine. Blend. Now this is a blend. This is not my blender, so I'm not really familiar with it. So I hope that if it has a pulse button, I often encourage my students to use that pulse button, because that way they're not blending it too long. And you don't want to blend it too long. It depends on the look that you want to achieve with your paper. Pulse it for a little bit, and then stop it and just look at it. Now at this point, you actually could make paper out of that, but it would be very, very chunky. It would still look like the original papers. I like it to be a little more mixed than that, so I'm going to mix it some more. I have not achieved that oatmeal look. Now you can see where it's getting a lot more like that loose running oatmeal. You still see the foil pieces that are floating to the top, but you really don't see a whole lot of the chunks of that original paper or that cotton linter that we added to it. Now, another thing that you can add to your paper that will give it a smoother texture is something that is waxed. I use these once in a while. These are just those simple little baking cups that are waxed. I like the texture to show, so I'm going to leave it as it is right now. And now I'm going to move to my actual decal box. Now this is a decal box that I purchased. This was an Arnold Groomer supply, and it has these wonderful Velcro straps on the bottom, so I am able to keep everything together with this Velcro size box, and this is easy to handle. Now, the thing that you are going to put down first on the bottom of your box is a piece of very fine, like screen. Now this is a plastic screen. You can buy screens that are very, very fine in places that sell hardware materials, and I buy these through the Arnold Groomer, but you can use other materials as long as it is a fine porous material that will allow the water to go through this. You can use it. So that goes on first, and then I put this on the bottom. This is going to help me to drain it. And then I'm going to take this strap and I'm going to tightly strap it on there. And then when I turn it over, you see that the screen is in the bottom of the box. Now, the screen goes in a tub of water. You can do this in your sink at home. If your decal box is not too big, you can do it in your sink. I use dish pans, things like that to do it. But when you put it in your box, you want it, there's water already in here. I've already placed water in here. I would say it's probably about 1.5 inches to 2 inches of water. You want the water to be higher than where that screen is. So you need the water to come up a little bit past that. Now, and to avoid a lot of bubbles in there, you want to put it in first at an angle. I always put it in, see the water coming up in it, and then just very slowly place it in the box. If you see bubbles, and there's some bubbles in there, I like to kind of tap on that and make sure that those bubbles go to the edges and are not trapped up under that screen. It'll still make paper, but sometimes it'll make some weak spots in your paper, so you don't want to do that. So I've got this fully submerged now in my pan of water, and now I'm going to pour this into the box. Now, I always say when you pour, don't just go to the middle and just dump it all in there. When you pour in the box, you want to make a zigzag motion. Go back and forth, pour it very slowly into the box. So as I pour, I'm going to move back and forth. So I've pretty much emptied the blender. Everything is now inside my decal box. Now, when you look at this very closely, you can see that there's some areas that have more pulp than others. The easiest thing to do is to take your finger, or if it's a very large box, your whole hand, and kind of shimmy it back and forth in the box. I just use one finger because this is a small box, but I want to go back and forth. The main place that you want to make sure that it has some of that pulp is in the corners of the box. That is the area that is most likely to not have enough pulp. When you pour it, it doesn't go to the corners. So once you have done that, I let it settle and stop moving. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this up out of the water. Now, it is very important when you pick it up out of the water that you keep it as level as possible. If you tilt your box, you're going to wind up with all your pulp going to that side. So it's very important that you pick this up as level as you can. Now, there's some suction that's built up, so sometimes you have to pull pretty hard. Don't be afraid to do that. As that water gets higher, you will find out that it does kind of develop some suction. Now, this is the boat. Now we're ready to get the excess water out of the paper. So what we're going to do now, and that's why these Velcro straps are so great, we're now going to open this up, and we are going to lift this box up so that all that remains is the paper pulp on the screen. I hope everybody can see. So what we have is that piece of paper that we now are going to get all the excess water out of so that it'll be a nice, hopefully pretty thin piece of paper. Now you can vary the thickness of your paper. I always teach making a pretty thick piece of paper, but as you experiment you can put less and less in there and make it really almost translucent. I have a couple of examples on the table at the end. One of those you can pretty much see through. It's so thin. So you can make some pretty thin pieces of paper depending on how much pulp you pour in the box. So now what I'm going to do is take this screen. Now this is this is not a metal screen. You don't want metal screen because it will rust. But this is a plastic screen that again they sell at places like Lowe's that you can then put over your paper. Now the reason you do that, you don't want any of that paper fiber to get stuck on anything. So you want to make sure that you have the screen over the top of it. And this is where our sponges come in. So now we're going to get out excess water with the sponge. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to take this sponge, make sure your sponge is very dry, and I'm just going to lightly press with the sponge so that it is picking up some of that excess water. Now the reason you don't want to press too hard is you really do not want that paper to go out on the edges unevenly. One of the things that happens if you press too hard, some of those paper pulp fibers will go out in this direction, and then you've got this very jagged edge. Now, somebody asked me earlier about how do you get that rag edge. It's a natural component of handmade paper. It's one of the ways that you can identify handmade paper is if it has that nice rag edge, and I really love the rag edge. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my block. This is just a block that is further going to kind of press that water out of it. Again, you want to press firmly, but not with all your might. You want to do it kind of lightly, so again, that we don't have that paper displaced and you have one side that becomes real thin and one side that is thicker. You want it to be as consistent as possible. So when you press, all you're doing, again, is just squeezing out a little bit of that excess water, and it's going through to the bottom of the pan. Now, underneath this grate that we have, you could use all different kinds of things. Anything that would just keep it from laying down flat on your cookie sheet or your pan. Because if you leave it flat on the pan, then when you press out that water, it's not going to go anywhere. You want to have it be able to drain. So that's why that's there. Now, after this process, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a couch sheet. Now this is spelled C-O-U-C-H. Now you want to press this paper down on top of the screen. Now you can use your block for evenness. I like to do that rather than use my hand. I've seen some people use other, hard instruments. I've seen somebody use a rolling pin. Now, if you use a rolling pin, your paper is going to get thinner. So I don't like the rolling pin, but some people do like that. If you want it to get really, really thin, you can do that. Now you can see that this couch paper is like blotter paper, and it has taken up a lot of the water that is in that paper. Now I'm going to do it again. So I've gotten a lot of the water out. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to put this with 2 brand new coot sheets around it. But before I do that, I need to pull off the screen. Always pull from a corner and do it very slowly. As you do this, can you see, Jane? Okay. As you do this, just make sure that nothing is sticking to it. Now, if I were to do that and that paper pulp is some of it stuck on here, then I know that I have not removed enough water. I would put this back down. I would go through the process with the coot sheet again to remove more water. It should not come off on this screen. So when I take that screen off, you can see, and just looking at the sides, look how much thinner it is. The water has now, most of it has been removed, so we have a much thinner and more beautiful and usable piece of paper. Put that down on this side, and then I'm going to press down again with my block, very lightly, not hard. And it's really not true. You can tell it's getting dry because you don't see that coot sheet getting as soaked as it was before. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over. Now I want to see if I can get off this screen. So what I want to do, same process as what I just did. I want to do it from pulling a corner, and what's happening?
Stuck.
It's stuck. It's not ready yet. So what that means is I'm going to flip it back over, and I probably am going to change my coot sheet, and I'm going to do it again. So we've got to remove enough water that screen is actually going to come off of that without removing the paper, not tearing the paper. Now once you have gotten enough water out of it, I promise you it does come off of that bottom screen. I thought it was probably dry enough, but it wasn't, so we need to go back and do this again. Now I'm going to flip it again, and we're going to see. Okay, now I know you can see it pretty well. When it comes off, you know when it starts to peel back from that corner, then it's dry enough. Now, as I said, you want to do this really slowly. You honestly can't do it too slow, but you can definitely do it too fast. Now, you see, it's because this was in the way, I couldn't pull it the way I wanted to, but I can just gently do like that and pat it back down, and it's fine. So now I'm going to take another coot sheet. I'm going to put it on top. I'm going to use my block to go over that whole sheet. And you can see almost no water is transferring. Now, at this point, you have a decision to make. And for many years, when I taught this, I said, okay, move to the ironing board now. We're going to iron the rest of the moisture out. If you're in a hurry, that's the best thing to do. Don't want it on too high a setting, but if you iron over this now with the iron on the ironing board, you will see that steam rising from the paper, which means that you're drying it further. The best way to do this, once you have removed the water, is to really just leave it alone. I take off the top sheet and just leave it like that. I transfer this to a dry surface and I just let it dry naturally. That way you will not get the curled edges. When you iron it, you tend to get the edges to curl up. Most of the ones, as you can see over there, that I have done, my students did, they all ironed them, and you see that their edges are kind of ruffled and not as smooth or flat as we might like them to be. That is because they were dried unevenly with that iron.